Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today will be a quick one. It will just be focusing on the IELTS speaking exam. I'll be going on the IELTS website and looking at the sample questions, kind of like a mock test, and I'll be doing my best to answer part one of the speaking task. So I'm just going to be answering the questions. I'm not going to be overthinking it. I don't want it to sound too scripted. I want it to be authentic and natural. After each question, I'm going to analyze that whilst looking at the IELTS criteria so we can see the type of thing which they're looking for and the type of ways in which you can do well in your exam. Okay, so the first topic we have here is about the hometown or village. There's 4 questions on this. Then it moves on to your accommodation, and there are 4 questions on this as well. Not that it really matters, but for the questions, I'm not actually going to be talking about my hometown. I'm just going to be talking about somewhere where I lived for a few years, mainly because it's just a bit more interesting than my hometown, and I'd want this video to be a bit more engaging because when you're trying to learn something, especially another language, you want it to be interesting. But I digress. Let's get on to the questions. Question number 1. What kind of place is it? So it is a beautiful historic city in the south of England. It's about an hour away on the train from London, which is of course the capital, and it is called Oxford. What is the most interesting part of your town or village? For me, the most interesting part is the fact that, well, it's very student oriented. You've probably heard of Oxford University. It's quite famous, and there's actually another university there as well. So it's very student oriented, which I think is good because it brings a lot of diversity to the area. And I think just having these different cultures in the area, it definitely helps with making it a bit more of an interesting place to live. What kind of jobs do the people in your town or village do? So, as mentioned before, there are a lot of students there, so there's quite a lot of part time work going around. It tends to be in retail or hospitality, but of course, there are quite a lot of young professionals there as well. There's a wide variety of jobs, and as mentioned previously, it is about an hour on the train from London, so I think a lot of people choose to work in London and do the commute every day on the train. In general, there's a lot of young professionals and, of course, a lot of students, so quite a big variety of different jobs. Would you say it's a good place to live and why? I may be biased, but I'd say it is an amazing place to live. I love living there personally. I think the reason why I like it so much is it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You get the benefit of living in a city, the excitement of that, and just the fact that there's a lot of stuff going on. For example, the bars, the restaurants, the shops, and that sort of thing. But the good thing about Oxford as well is that you get the beautiful scenery of it. It's very green, it's very nice, there's lots of nature. So if you're someone like me that enjoys outdoor activities and just being amongst nature, then it could be the perfect place for you to live. Okay, so I'm just going to be analysing some of the answers that I gave now, whilst comparing it to the IELTS Band 9 criteria. So the first part of this is the fluency and coherence section, and that starts with speaks fluently with only rare repetition or self-correction. Any hesitation is content related rather than to find words or grammar. This is something I was able to do quite well for the most part of it. An example of this would be in the second answer I gave, where I said, "You've probably heard of Oxford University. It's quite famous." There was a pause between university and its, but it wasn't really relating to the vocabulary I was looking for. It was more content related. The second point is speaks coherently with fully appropriate cohesive features. Pretty much all the answers were coherent. There was no point listening to that where it was hard to understand what I was saying. And the final point is develops topics fully and appropriately. This is something that I was quite strong in, I'd say, in all answers. For example, the first question, what kind of place is it? It's Oxford. It's about an hour away from London. The second question, I said how it's home to Oxford University, and there's actually another university there as well. For the third answer, I said that, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of students there, so that means that there's a lot of part-time work there as well. And also I said how, due to the fact that it's an hour away from London, that leads to a lot of people actually working in London but doing the commute from Oxford to London and back. Finally, for the fourth answer, I was able to expand on that and develop the topic fully and appropriately by saying that I personally like Oxford because there's a lot of greenery around and a lot of nature, and I personally am someone that enjoys being outdoors and that sort of thing. For the second part of it, which is the lexical resource section, it's split into two areas. The first one is uses vocabulary with full flexibility and precision in all topics. I think for the most part I was okay with this, but in my third answer I noticed I did repeat myself a few times. For example, I used the phrase as mentioned before and as mentioned previously. I used the phrase there's a wide variety of jobs there, so there's quite a big variety of different jobs. And I also said there's quite a lot of young professionals there as well. In general, there's a lot of young professionals there. So I think if you were taking this exam, they wouldn't mark you down on that. But from me, as a native speaker, it's just something that I've noticed that I could have improved on. However, in the uses idiomatic language naturally and accurately section, I think I did quite a good job at this because I was able to use a couple of idioms in my answers, specifically in the third answer where I said there's quite a lot of part-time work going round. Going round means there's a lot of it available, and that was quite a natural way of using it. It didn't feel forced, and it was very relevant to the question. And in the fourth question, I said, I love living there because it's kind of like the best of both worlds. The best of both worlds it's an expression that means you get the advantages of two different things without having the disadvantages. For example, the best of both worlds, I got the advantage of living in a city, which is exciting and nice, but I got the advantage as well of living somewhere a bit quieter because it was quite a scenic and relaxing area that I lived in. So I think with that in mind, I would have done quite well in this section. And for the third part, which is grammatical range and accuracy, I needed to use a full range of structures naturally and appropriately, and also produce consistent and accurate structures apart from slips, which would be characteristic of native speaker speech. And I did just that. I was able to use all the different types of structures that I needed to use. It was accurate, it was natural, and of course I did have a slip or two, but as a native speaker, that is characteristic of a normal conversation. So I did what I needed to do for that section. So finally, we're at the pronunciation section, where you need to use a full range of pronunciation features with precision and subtlety, sustain flexibility of features throughout, and be effortless to understand. Of course, as a native speaker, my pronunciation on all the words was correct, as it should be. So I can't really give much relevant feedback on this. This is just a case of listening to how the words are pronounced correctly and practicing repeating them. Okay, we're going to be moving on to the second part now, where they're asking us about our accommodation. Question number 1, tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in. So I live in a flat with my friend who is also a student. It's a really nice flat and it's conveniently located next to the university and also next to a nice park, which is lovely, of course. How long have you lived there? So the flat I'm living at the moment it's a 12-month contract, and we've lived there for 3 months, meaning that we have 9 months left. However, I have lived in Oxford for 2 years prior to that, so in total just over 2 years, but in the flat I'm living in at the moment, 3 months. What do you like about living there? There are so many things I like about living there. Firstly, it's very conveniently located next to the university, as mentioned before. It's next to the shops as well. It's got a beautiful park there, so when the sun's out, you can just step out your door and you can go for a run, you can go for a walk, you can play some football. There's so many different options you can do, and it's right there as well, which is just beautiful. And in general, the flat is clean, it's nice, it's tidy, it's very well located, so you can't really complain. What sort of accommodation would you like to live in? Well, if I'm being honest with you, there's not a lot I would change about the accommodation I'm living in at the moment. However, if I could choose somewhere new to live, I would probably live somewhere even more rural and away from it all, in the nature, that sort of thing, a lot more quiet and calm and relaxed. The reason behind that is I really enjoy outdoor activities. I love being surrounded by nature, trees, and like listening to the water from a lake and that sort of thing. So, ideally, for new accommodation, I'd like it to be somewhere calm and relaxed and just a very chilled place. So now I'm just going to be analysing my second set of answers in relation to the fluency and coherence section of the Band 9 criteria. So firstly, speaks fluently with only rare repetition or self-correction. Any hesitation is content related rather than to find words or grammar. Once again, I'd say this is definitely relevant to the answers I gave. For example, in the second answer, I said, the flat I'm living in at the moment it's a 12-month contract. So that pause there wasn't for me to think about the vocabulary I wanted to use. It was more focused on the content, me thinking, actually remembering how long the contract was. In the third answer, I said, when I was talking about the park, I said you can go for a run, you can go for a walk, you can play football. There's so many options you can do. It's just right there as well, which is beautiful. So there was a couple of pauses there after I said you can play some football, pause. There's so many different options. That wasn't related to the vocabulary. It was a lot more content focused. And after that as well, it was the same thing. The pause between there's so many different options and it's right there as well. It's focused on the content as opposed to the actual grammar. Secondly, with the speaks coherently with fully appropriate cohesive features. All of my answers were coherent, as you'd expect from a native speaker, so there's not really any sort of advice I can give on this, but what I would say is there's no need to make the answers longer than they have to be. When you're looking at the level 9 videos on YouTube, you will notice that a lot of the top answers are short and sweet because the more you talk, the higher chance there is that you'll make a mistake and you'll sound less coherent. So my advice would be to not say more than you need to. But of course, you need to keep the next point in mind, which is developing the answer without hurting your coherency. Basically, once you've answered the question, just don't continue to talk just for the sake of it. So in relation to developing the topic fully and appropriately, this is something I was able to do in all my answers, and the way I did this is basically just answering the question in black and white and then developing on that answer. For example, question number 1, tell me about the kind of accommodation you live in. I answered that question immediately by saying, so I live in a flat with my friend. I then developed on that by saying, he's also a student. It's a nice flat, it's conveniently located next to the university, and there's also a park there, which is lovely, of course. In the second answer, the question was, how long have you lived there? And I answered the question by saying, so I've lived there for 3 months. I then developed on that by saying, however, I have lived in Oxford for 2 years prior to that. So in total, just over 2 years. But in the flat I'm living in at the moment, 3 months. So I then related it back to my initial answer, which was 3 months. An example of me developing the topic in the third answer was, so I answered the question, they said, what do you like living about there? I said, it's got a beautiful park there. I then developed on that by saying, so when the sun's out, you can step out the door, you can go for a run, you can go for a walk, you can play some football. So I answered the question by saying, there's a park there. I then develop the topic by saying why I enjoy the park, why the park is beneficial to me. So that's an example of me developing the topic fully and appropriately whilst not saying more than I need to, and therefore increasing the chance of me not sounding completely coherent. Finally, for the fourth answer, what sort of accommodation would you most like to live in? I answered the question by saying, well, if I'm honest with you, there isn't a lot I would change. However, if I were to live somewhere else, I'd want it to be a bit more relaxed amongst nature because I personally enjoy outdoor activities. So I answered the question by saying I'd want it to be more in nature, and I developed on the topic by explaining why, because I personally like being out in nature. And those are just some good examples of developing the topic fully and appropriately. The more you practice and the more that you watch these type of videos, you'll get a better idea of how to structure your answers so that you're able to develop on a topic while still sounding coherent and fluent. For the lexical resource stage, you need to be using vocabulary with full flexibility and precision in all topics. This is something I didn't think I did that well in these particular answers. For example, in the third question, I said, it's got a beautiful park there that when the sun's out, you can just step out your door, play football. And then I said, and it's just right there as well, which is just beautiful. So in the same answer, I repeated the word beautiful twice when I could have used some other synonyms such as stunning or pleasant or something like that. So if I were to do this again, I think I would look to increase the vocabulary I use, particularly in the adjectives that I use. In terms of using idiomatic languages naturally and accurately, I think I was able to do this quite well. An example of this would be when I said in the third answer again, when the sun's out, you can just step out your door. So when the sun's out, it just means that the weather is nice, the sun is literally out, and it sounds quite natural, and it's something that a native would definitely say. But in terms of any other idiomatic languages, I didn't really use. I didn't see myself using any more in these particular answers because there wasn't really a need to. And with stuff like that, I think it's better if it comes naturally instead of just forcing it into your answers just for the sake of it. So for the grammatical range and accuracy section, you need to be using a full range of structures naturally and appropriately, and also produce consistent and accurate structures apart from slips, which are characteristic of native speakers. So once again, I was able to do this. I used a wide variety of different sentence structures as I needed to, and of course there were one or two slips, which is completely natural for native speakers. So you are allowed to have a slip or two in your speech because that is just completely natural, even for native speakers. And in terms of the using the structures naturally and appropriately, I think that once again relates to just watching a lot of the level 9 videos, see how they structure their answer, and you can get an idea of how to do that. So finally, the pronunciation stage, you need to be using a full range of pronunciation features with precision and subtlety. Sustain flexible use of features throughout and try to be effortless to understand. Once again, as a native speaker, all the words were pronounced correctly and it was easy to understand, which is just something that comes naturally, of course. So I can't really give that much practical advice on this. What I would say is just to continue to watch these sorts of videos, listen to how the words are pronounced, and just try to have conversations with native speakers. If you want good apps to do this on your phone, you can use HelloTalk or Hi Native, or perhaps you just know someone who speaks the English language, that sort of thing. The more real life conversations you have with them, whether that be in person or over the phone, your pronunciation will get better and you will feel a lot more confident and therefore be a lot easier to understand as well. Okay, before we get to the conclusion, I just wanted to say thanks to IELTS because everything I used in this video came from their website. I have attached all of the links in the bio. And if you wanted to practice further, I definitely advise you go to those links and their website because that's where I got the draft question from. And they also have some example answers on there as well as, of course, the marking criteria. Okay, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. This was, of course, my first video on IELTS. That's why I wanted to keep it short, because I'm not sure how useful this sort of thing would be. So if you are studying for IELTS and you've watched a few of these videos, let me know if this was beneficial to you. Of course, I hope it was. And more importantly, give me some feedback on the type of thing you'd want me to do in the future to make it even better for you. I'm, of course, more than happy to do more of these types of videos, but some feedback would be good on what was helpful and what you'd want me to do in the future. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon for another lesson. Cheers.